He pulled up to a rusted shack in one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in Texas with $500 in his hand and urgency in his eyes. Madeline thought she was just turning down an insult. She didn't realize she'd just put herself between a billionaire and the secret hiding under her own floorboards. If you've ever been lowballed, pushed around, or treated like you don't belong because of where you live, this story is for you. Madeline Williams is the last holdout on the scruffiest patch of land in Hunters Creek Village, Houston, an aging tin shack wedged between manicured lawns and mansions worth more than she'll see in a lifetime. To realtors, she's a nuisance. To the homeowners association, she's an embarrassment. To Madeline, the shack is all she has left of her grandfather and the only thing keeping her from disappearing completely. One humid evening, as the sky darkens over Buffalo Bayou, a black SUV noses onto her lot. The man who steps out doesn't look like someone who bargains over shacks. Crisp suit, perfect haircut, expensive shoes instantly ruined by mud. He introduces himself as Richard Alleman, a local investor, and flashes $500 in cash if she'll sign her land over on the spot. The offer is laughably low for one of the richest zip codes in Texas, but the way his eyes keep darting toward her shack's crooked door makes her uneasy. Madeline turns him down. That instinctive refusal becomes the first tug on a thread that unravels Richard's carefully hidden truth. He's not just a local buyer, he's a billionaire clean energy mogul whose entire flagship project, an upcoming multi-billion-dollar IPO, rests on a secret buried directly beneath her home. When Madeline pries up the warped floorboards of the shack, she discovers a hidden storm cellar packed with her grandfather's old survey maps, legal documents, and a locked steel safe. Inside is proof that her family still owns the mineral and subsurface access rights under her tiny parcel, and that those rights control the only legal access point to a massive salt cavern Richard's company has been quietly converting into an underground energy storage facility. If she had taken the $500, Richard would have sealed complete control of the cavern and gone public as a visionary. Instead, her refusal forces him into a very public fight over who truly owns the power beneath Hunters Creek Village. By the end, the woman everyone mocked for living in a shack becomes the controlling partner in a billion-dollar energy lease and the person who exposes the fragile lie propping up Richard Alleman's empire. The taillights disappeared down the quiet street, but the dust they kicked up still hung in the air. For a moment, Madeline just stood there in the tall grass, the generator buzzing behind her, the single bulb over the shack door throwing a yellow halo around her boots. The $500 he'd held out to her might as well have been a mirage now, already gone, like he'd never been here at all. Hunters Creek Village didn't look like a place where people argued over $500. A few hundred yards away, beyond the tree line, the neighborhood glowed like a catalog. Sunset caught on slate roofs and copper gutters, iron gates guarded driveways long enough to need their own zip code. Somewhere, a fountain burbled in a courtyard, water lit from beneath, throwing little coins of light onto the manicured hedges. A Tesla ghosted past on the road, so quiet she almost didn't hear it, just the faint crunch of tires and the glow of a dashboard the size of a television. In that car, someone was probably complaining about HOA dues while their phone reminded them to order organic dog treats. Then there was her place. The last ugly patch of land in the richest neighborhood in Texas. Her lot was a jagged bite taken out of the street's perfection, waist-high weeds, patches of hard-baked dirt, a few brave wildflowers that had somehow survived both drought and flood. The shack squatted in the middle of it all like a forgotten toolbox, corrugated metal walls streaked with rust, corners patched with whatever her grandfather had been able to scavenge. The roof was a mosaic of tin sheets, tar paper, and one mysterious square of stop sign. The only pretty thing was the light, a single bulb hanging over the doorway, powered by a small gas generator that rattled and coughed by the back wall. It made the shack look like it was exhaling light into the dark, stubbornly insisting it existed. Madeline reached up and touched the warm metal of the doorframe, more out of habit than anything. The vibrations from the generator tickled her fingertips. "Still here," she murmured. The shack didn't answer. It never did, but sometimes when the wind caught the loose edges of the roof just right, the whole structure would groan like it was thinking about something. An hour earlier, before the SUV, she'd been inside trying to convince the wiring to kill her. The generator had cut out twice mid-spin cycle of her tiny washer, and she'd already blown one cheap electric cord that week. She was out of spares, and payday was, well, payday implied there was pay. She knelt on the plywood floor, a cluster of orange cords spread out in front of her like strangled snakes. The air smelled of gasoline, detergent, and the everlasting tang of metal. "Come on," she muttered, jiggling the plug. "Just get me through one more load, then you can die." The bulb over her head flickered once in protest, and then steadied. The washing machine in the corner, more rust than enamel, rumbled back to life, sloshing water against the drum. She sat back on her heels, stretching her lower back until it popped. The motion made the stack of envelopes on the crate beside her wobble threateningly. Overdue. Final notice. Property tax reminder. She flipped one envelope over with a finger, then another, like maybe the words would change if she shuffled them enough. They didn't. They never did. On top of the pile lay a photograph, its edges softened from too many thumbs. Her grandfather standing exactly where she was now, 20 years younger, the shack behind him still shiny in places. He wore a button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, a hard hat tilted back on his head, and the same tired but stubborn set to his mouth that she saw in the mirror every morning. "Land is leverage," he'd told her 100 times. "They're not making any more of it. Don't you ever sign something you don't understand." At 12, she'd rolled her eyes and asked why they couldn't leverage themselves into a house with insulation. At 28, standing in the same shack with the same leaks, the words sounded a lot less funny. She got up and went to the corner where a plastic basin sat on a crate. The water in it was lukewarm, collected that morning from the spigot she shared, illegally, with the construction site down the road. She splashed her face, scrubbed at the sweat and dust, then dried off with the least ragged end of a towel. Outside, the sky was shifting. Through the crooked window, she could see the live oaks along the street catching the last smear of orange. The big houses were already glowing from within, rectangles of light behind tinted glass. She usually liked this time of evening. From inside the shack, with the generator humming and the single bulb making a tiny sun over the door, she could pretend she wasn't entirely out of place. The sizzle of cicadas and the occasional dog bark blurred the boundaries between her lot and everyone else's. But tonight, the stack of envelopes felt heavier than usual. The number on that last property tax notice, circled in red ink by some bored county employee, kept flashing behind her eyes. She checked the little calendar tacked on the wall. A week, maybe 10 days before someone at the county office decided to get serious about it. She swallowed, went back to fiddling with the cords just to have something for her hands to do. Trespasser, the neighborhood whispers had called her, more than once. Never mind that the land was legally hers. Never mind that her grandfather had bought it back when this street had been more ditch than driveway, more cow pasture than gated community. History didn't matter much to people who could order new marble countertops with a phone call. She'd heard the HOA refer to her place as blight during a community meeting, had sat in the hard plastic chair at the back of the room, listening to them talk about her as if she weren't there. Some parcels just never should have been developed, one man had said, and several heads had turned toward her lot on the projected map. Now, as the generator rattled and the washer shook and the envelopes glared, she felt that old elastic tension stretching inside her, pulled between the urge to disappear and the equally strong urge to dig her heels in and make the entire neighborhood choke on her continued existence. The taillights hit the window before she heard the engine. A harsh white wash cut across the shack's warped glass for a heartbeat. Madeline froze, extension cord still in her hand. Visitors after dark on her lot usually meant raccoons or teenagers looking for a place to smoke where their parents couldn't see. Engines, though, that was new.
The generator's noise made it hard to place the sound, but as it drew closer, she recognized the smooth, almost smug hum of money. Not a rattling pickup or a contractor's van. Something big, something expensive. She shifted her weight, the wooden step creaking under her boot. He pushed the door open. The last of the sunset was clinging to the horizon, a bruise of purple and gold over the dark line of trees. The street lamps had flicked on, throwing circles of light on the paved road. In the middle of her lot, tires sinking into the soft ground, sat a black SUV that looked like it rolled straight out of a luxury commercial. The driver's door opened. A man climbed out. Madeline's first thought was that he'd made a wrong turn. Nothing about him fit the picture. The tailored gray suit, the perfect haircut, expensive shoes instantly ruined by mud. He introduced himself as Richard Alleman, a local
Investor, and flashes $500 in cash if she'll sign her land over on the spot. The offer is laughably low for one of the richest zip codes in Texas, but the way his eyes keep darting toward her shack's crooked door makes her uneasy. Madeline turns him down. That instinctive refusal becomes the first tug on a thread that unravels Richard's carefully hidden truth. He's not just a local buyer, he's a billionaire clean energy mogul whose entire flagship project and upcoming multi-billion-dollar IPO rests on a secret buried directly beneath her home. When Madeline pries up the warped floorboards of the shack, she discovers a hidden storm cellar packed with her grandfather's old survey maps, legal documents, and a locked steel safe. Inside is proof that her family still owns the mineral and subsurface access rights under her tiny parcel, and that those rights control the only legal access point to a massive salt cavern Richard's company has been quietly converting into an underground energy storage facility. If she had taken the $500, Richard would have sealed complete control of the cavern and gone public as a visionary. Instead, her refusal forces him into a very public fight over who truly owns the power beneath Hunter's Creek Village. By the end, the woman everyone mocked for living in a shack becomes a controlling partner in a billion-dollar energy lease and the person who exposes the fragile lie propping up Richard Alleman's empire. The cafe was already busy. A pair of moms in workout gear gossiping over iced lattes, a man in a golf polo hunched over his laptop, two teenagers taking turns photographing each other's croissants for social media. Madeline took her coffee to a small table near the window. From there, she could see both the street outside and the TV mounted in the corner, permanently tuned to some news channel with the sound low and subtitles on. She tried not to listen to the cluster of voices at the table behind her, tried and failed. Honestly, if the city had any backbone, they'd condemn it, one of the moms was saying. It drags down the whole street. She's been there forever, the other replied. You know how some people get with family land? Family land, the first scoffed. It's a shack. My husband looked up comps. That lot alone is worth at least... She broke off as Sasha approached their table, but their eyes drifted to the window, toward the vague direction of the bayou, toward Madeline's lot, toward her, Maddie from the shack. Madeline took a long sip of coffee, let the bitterness sit on her tongue until it dulled the sting in her chest. Let them talk. They didn't remember when this street had been mud and mosquitoes and the occasional cow. They'd never seen her grandfather come home covered in dust and sweat, hard hat tucked under one arm, proud and exhausted because the land he'd bought for next to nothing might finally mean something. Back then, the shack had really been temporary, just a place to sleep while he worked on something bigger, a real house he'd promised, brick and insulation and a porch with a swing. Then the project he'd pinned his hopes on got delayed, then shelved, then the company folded, then the neighborhood around them exploded in value while his paperwork sat in a drawer. The shack stayed. Temporary had a way of hardening into permanent when life ran out of alternatives. Never sign anything you don't understand, Maddie, he'd told her, one night when the rain drummed so hard on the metal roof she'd been sure it would cave in. Not a lease, not a loan, not a deed. Land is leverage. Once you give it up, You don't get it back. She had been 10 or 11, wrapped in a blanket on the cot, watching him spread crinkled papers across the crate they used as a table. "What's leverage?" she'd asked. He'd picked up the crowbar he kept by the door, wedged it under the leg of the crate, and leaned on it. "See," he'd said as the heavy crate shifted. "Small thing moves a big thing if you use it right. That's leverage. Land works the same way. Doesn't look like much, but it moves a lot of weight." In the cafe, she curled her fingers around the paper cup until the cardboard went soft. Outside, a delivery truck rolled past. On the TV, the anchor's lips moved silently while the caption crawled along the bottom of the screen. She wasn't really watching until two words caught in her peripheral vision. Alaman Grid. Her head snapped up. On the screen, the anchor sat in front of a graphic that read, "Alaman Grid's record-breaking IPO. Can it rewire America?" Next to her, a photograph popped up. Madeline's stomach dropped. It was him. The same jawline, the same too careful hair, the same air of a man who expected doors to open before he reached them. No mud on his shoes this time, no creased suit from trudging through a field, just clean, curated power. The Houston-based clean energy company Alaman Grid is making waves this week as it prepares for what could be one of the largest tech IPOs of the decade. Founder and CEO Richard Alaman says the key is their proprietary underground storage system. The image changed to a sleek animation, a city skyline, then a cutaway view of the ground beneath it. Glowing blue tunnels snaked under cartoon houses, converging on a massive dark void labeled Subterranean Energy Reservoir Houston Project. The anchor's words marched silently along the bottom. Flagship underground energy storage facility in West Houston, utilizing existing salt caverns to store surplus power and stabilize the grid. Existing salt caverns, underground, West Houston. Madeline's fingers loosened on the cup. Lukewarm coffee sloshed onto her thumb. Richard Alaman. Not just a local investor, a billionaire. Heat crawled up her neck. For a moment, the sounds of the cafe went muffled, like someone had put a glass dome over her head. He hadn't said a word about energy or caverns or massive underground anything. He'd introduced himself like a guy who went around flipping nuisance lots for modest profit, not like someone whose face got airtime on financial news networks. "Maddie?" Sasha's voice came from somewhere to her left. "You okay? You look like you saw a ghost." She blinked, dragging her gaze away from the TV. "Just, didn't sleep great," she lied. Sasha slid a small plate onto the table, a blueberry muffin, slightly squashed. "Somebody ordered gluten-free. I gave them the wrong one. Can't resell it. It's yours if you want it." Madeline's protest died halfway up her throat. "Thanks," she managed. As soon as Sasha walked away, her eyes drifted back to the TV. They'd moved on to another segment, something about interest rates, but the afterimage of the diagram hung in her mind. A cavern under Houston lit up like the inside of a battery, lines connecting to neighborhoods, substations, grids. She pictured her own lot, the way the ground sometimes sounded hollow when she walked across certain spots, the way her grandfather had joked about the shack sitting on the belly of the earth. Land is leverage. Why would a billionaire personally drive to her property to offer her $500 if this was just about cleaning up an eyesore? Why lie? He had 100 legal ways to make her life difficult. He hadn't mentioned a single one. He came with a smile and a wad of cash instead. Unease, which had been a quiet whisper last night, started building walls inside her chest. Something bigger was at play, and whatever it was underneath her, not around her. She took the long way home, pedaling slowly, letting the caffeine fight with the anxiety for control of her bloodstream. The houses seemed even bigger in the late morning sun. Gardeners were out now, blowing leaves into obedient piles, trimming hedges into geometric shapes nature never intended. At one corner, a real estate agent was planting a sold rider on a for sale sign, already smiling for the photo her assistant snapped for social media. "Congratulations," the sign said in cheerful script. "Welcome home." Home. Right. She turned onto her street. Her lot came into view, a missing tooth between two perfectly aligned rows. Something hovered over it. She squinted against the glare. At first, she thought it was a large bird circling lazily. Then it tilted, caught the light at an unnatural angle. A drone. It floated maybe 30 feet above her shack, a compact gray thing with 4 spinning rotors. Its camera eye blinked, a tiny glass bead swiveling. As her bike tires crunched onto the gravel rut, the drone twitched like it had just noticed her. It rose a few feet higher, then zipped sideways, darting over the tree line and out of sight with an insect whine. Madeline coasted to a stop, heart thumping. Creepy, she muttered to the empty air. Maybe it was just some bored teenager, or a realtor getting aerial footage for a listing next door, or a billionaire who didn't like taking no for an answer, sending someone to get a better look at what he'd failed to buy for $500. She locked her bike to the shack out of habit and stood for a long moment scanning the sky. No sign of the drone, just a vulture circling in a lazy spiral far above, clearly uninterested in human drama. She went about her day because what else was she supposed to do? She hand-washed the clothes the generator hadn't had the strength to finish. She checked the patchy garden, coaxing life out of stubborn soil. She ignored the business card burning a rectangle of awareness in her back pocket. In the afternoon, as the sun slid a little lower and the heat shifted from unpleasant to "I live on the surface of Mercury," a white pickup rolled slowly down the street. The logo on the door was some surveying company she didn't recognize. 2 men sat in the cab, safety vests draped over the seats like afterthoughts. They parked a few houses down, stepped out with clipboards and measuring wheels, and began to study the edge of the asphalt with exaggerated focus. Madeline watched from her doorway, arms crossed. The men never stepped onto her lot. They never pointed directly at her shack. But every few minutes, one of them would glance over. Their eyes traced her property line, the subtle dip of the ground, the corner where the shack sat just a little lower than the street. After half an hour of measuring the road, they packed up and drove away, tires whispering on the pavement. She checked the street for any new marks, stakes, or spray paint. Nothing obvious, just the growing sense that invisible lines were being drawn around her without her consent. That night, the generator cut off early, out of gas and patience. The shack dropped into a softer darkness, illuminated only by a battery lantern on the crate table. Madeline lay on her cot, eyes fixed on the corrugated ceiling. The afterimage of the drone's blinking eye kept intruding on the rust stains overhead. Sleep didn't come. Finally, with a muttered curse, she swung her legs over the cot and reached under it. Her fingers brushed cardboard. She dragged out the box her grandfather had labeled in his looping script, "Land Papers." It had moved with her through every phase of her life, from this shack to the crappy apartment she'd rented for a while after he died, and then back again when she couldn't afford the rent anymore. She'd always meant to go through it properly, to understand every page the way he'd wanted. She had never quite found the time or the courage. Tonight, courage felt less optional. She flipped open the lid. Inside were manila folders, rolled maps, and a stack of spiral notebooks with frayed edges. She grabbed the top notebook and settled back against the thin pillow, lantern propped on the crate. The pages smelled like dust and ballpoint ink. Most of the entries were boring. Dates, weather notes, numbers that only made sense in his head. Here and there, a line she recognized, reminders to fix a leak, to call someone about a bill. And then, halfway through, a sketch. Her breath caught. He'd drawn a crude cross-section, a line labeled ground, a rectangle sitting on top of it labeled shack, and beneath that, a rough oval shaded dark. An arrow pointed to the oval. Beside it, in capital letters, he'd written, "Remember, it's not what they build on top, it's what they're after underneath." Madeline traced the words with one fingertip, heart beating in her throat. underground energy storage, existing salt caverns, a billionaire at her door with $500 and a fake smile. The drone's whine echoed in her ears. The surveyor's glances crawled along her skin. She closed the notebook slowly, palms damp. Her grandfather had always told her land was leverage. She'd thought he meant taxes and equity and the occasional pushy realtor. But as the wind rattled the shack's metal skin and the darkness pressed in around her, Madeline couldn't shake the feeling that whatever he'd really meant was deeper, literally. It was under her, and someone very powerful wanted it badly enough to lie. Madeline woke to the taste of paper in her mouth. For a second, she thought she'd literally been chewing on the notebook she'd fallen asleep with. Then she realized it was just the dry, sour feeling of too little sleep and too many worries grinding against her teeth. The lantern had gone out sometime in the night. Gray morning seeped in through the thin seams of the shack, turning everything a flat, tired color. The box of land papers sat open on the floor. The notebook with the crude cross-section sketch lay face up, her grandfather's block letters glaring at her. It's not what they build on top, it's what they're after underneath. She shut it gently and slid it back into the box, as if closing the cover might also close the questions it had opened in her head. The generator refused to start on the first pull, or the second. On the third, it sputtered to life in a cloud of exhaust, sounding exactly like her mood, resentful but functional. She had just grabbed the plastic basin to go beg water from the construction tap down the road when someone knocked on her shack door. Not a neighborly tap, a brisk, polite rap, rap, rap that said, "I have a schedule and this is item number 4 on it." She put the basin down slowly. "Yeah?" she called. "Ms. Williams?" a male voice answered, muffled by the metal. She cracked the door just enough to see a man in a brown polo and khaki pants standing on her step. He was carrying one of those hard plastic courier envelopes and a handheld device that looked like it enjoyed asking people for signatures. "Good morning," he said, businesslike. "Are you Madeline Williams?" She considered lying and then remembered the name painted on her mailbox in peeling letters. "That's me. I've got a delivery for you. Need your signature." He held out the device. She scrawled something vaguely name-shaped with the stylus and took the envelope. It was heavier than junk mail, lighter than doom. "Have a good one," the courier said, already halfway back to his van. She shut the door, peeled the adhesive strip with a fingernail, and slid out the contents. There was a cover letter on thick, expensive paper. The letterhead read, "Collins, Marsh & Tate, LLP, Attorneys at Law." The salutation was generic, "Dear Ms. Williams." She read the first paragraph out loud because it felt like the words might land differently if they had to bounce off the walls before hitting her. "Our firm represents Blackbriar Redevelopment, LLC, a local real estate investment entity, wishes to extend a revised and enhanced offer for the purchase of your property located at Deerburger Road." Her thumb hesitated over the second paragraph. 10,000. 10,000. The number sat on the page like a physical object. 10,000 could clear every debt she had and leave enough for more than instant ramen and canned beans. It could buy time, choices. It could also, apparently, buy more than just the rusted box she slept in. She skimmed down to the attached draft agreement. The legal language was dense, each sentence linked to 3 others by reference, as if the whole thing would collapse if you took one clause away. She grabbed a pen from the crate, clicked it, and started reading more carefully. "Hereby grants, bargains, sells, conveys, and transfers to buyer all of seller's right,
title and interest in and to the property, together with all improvements thereon, and all appurtenances, easements, and hereditances thereto appertaining, including without limitation all subsurface and mineral rights. Her pen paused on the phrase, subsurface and mineral rights. She underlined it once, then twice. Such grant to include any and all rights in and to any underground formations, cavities, reservoirs, or voids lying below the property. Circle. Seller hereby waives and relinquishes any present or future claim, entitlement, or interest in said subsurface formations. Big angry circle. She didn't understand half the jargon, but she understood a few things very clearly. They wanted what was under the property. They wanted it in a way that required multiple paragraphs and without limitation and relinquishes any present or future claim. She flipped back to the number at the top. 10,000 suddenly looked smaller. Sneaky, she muttered, and drew a little skull next to subsurface and mineral rights, just to make herself feel slightly less like she was drowning in someone else's language. Word traveled fast in a neighborhood where nothing more exciting than a new mailbox usually happened. By mid-afternoon, as she drained the last of the generator gas into its tank and tried to coax her tomatoes into not dying, she saw them coming. Two of her neighbors trotting across the street in coordinated athletic leisure and concerned expressions. Madeline, called the taller one, waving. She was the type who always smelled like expensive lotion and had opinions about everything from recycling bins to roofing colors. Madeline could never remember her name, but everyone else called her Karen, so that was what stuck in her head. "Got a minute?" Lynn added, like the answer might be no. Madeline wiped her hands on her jeans and straightened up. "Sure." They stopped just shy of stepping onto her actual lot, their sneakers teetering on the invisible line between acceptable grass and whatever this is. "We heard," Karen began, lowering her voice to a confidential murmur, "that you've had an offer." Of course, the information had probably traveled via group text with screenshots before the courier had turned his van around. "Something like that," Madeline said. $10,000, right? For this place?" Lynn waved a hand vaguely at the shack, then caught herself and tried to make it look like she was gesturing at the horizon instead. "It's a generous offer," Karen put in quickly, "given, the state of things." Her gaze flicked up and down the shack, taking in every dent and stain. Her fingers itched to cross her arms, but she forced herself to keep them loose at her sides. "It's an offer," she said. "Doesn't mean I have to take it." "But honey," Lynn said, voice edging into pity, "this is the kind of chance people like us don't get twice. You could get a real place, somewhere safer, with insulation." "Somewhere not here," the wordless part of the sentence added. "Somewhere we don't have to pretend not to see you from our front windows." "What do you care?" Madeline asked, keeping her tone mild. "You'd get a higher property value either way, right? House or shack gone." Karen's smile tightened. "It's not about that. It's about progress. The neighborhood is really turned around in the last 20 years. Yours is the last, holdout," Lynn supplied. "Relic," Karen corrected. "And frankly, people have been talking about that patch for before we moved in." "Interest in that patch." The phrase landed with a soft thud in Madeline's chest. "How long before you moved in?" she asked, sharper than she meant to. Karen blinked. "I don't know exactly. I just know our realtor said there was interest in that parcel for years, but that the owner was, emotionally attached." She made air quotes. "I assumed he meant your grandfather."
Emotionally attached. Like the man hadn't poured his whole tired soul into making this place stand when everything else in his life collapsed. "Anyway," Lynn said, stepping in to smooth things, "just think about it, okay? We'd hate for you to miss out and then have the city come in and, do something less friendly." less friendly than a $10,000 carrot, more like a stick. "I'll think about it," Madeline said, because it was easier than arguing. They both visibly relaxed, as if she'd said yes instead of, "I'd rather eat my own hand than sign away something I don't understand." "Good," Karen said, "because we'd really love to see a nice new build here, something that fits the neighborhood, maybe a pool." She smiled at the shack one last time, like she was already erasing it in her mind, and then they retreated to their side of the street. Madeline watched them go, jaw clenched until her teeth hurt. Interest in that patch for years, realtors making notes, companies changing names, offers circling like vultures. What was under her that they wanted so badly they'd been circling since before she was old enough to spell parcel? That night, when the air cooled enough to breathe without feeling like she was inhaling soup, she dug deeper into the land papers box. This time, she went for the older-looking items, yellowed folders, curled photographs, brittle newspaper clippings. In one photo, her grandfather stood on the bank of the bayou, younger and broader. He wore a hard hat, reflective vest, and a grin that crinkled his entire face. Behind him, towers and tanks and a tangle of pipes turned the horizon industrial. On the back, in faded ink, he'd written, "Buffalo Project, Phase 1. Another photo showed a row of workers in muddy boots, dwarfed by a massive drill rig. Someone had scribbled, "Cavern Survey Crew," along the bottom. A newspaper clipping, carefully folded, bore a headline from decades ago: "Proposed Gas Storage Project Stalls After Community Outcry." The article talked about safety concerns, environmental risk, regulatory issues. It mentioned a proposal to use an underground salt formation as a storage cavern for natural gas. It did not mention her grandfather by name, but in the margin he'd written, "Idiots panicked, caverns fine, politics not science." She laid the photos and clipping in a small row on the floor, connecting them like puzzle pieces. Grandfather, cavern, project stalled, neighborhood exploded in value afterward, interest in that parcel for years. Her eyes drifted to the far corner of the shack, where the floor sloped slightly, just enough that things left on the ground tended to migrate there over time. She heard his voice in her head again, that half-teasing, half-serious tone he used when he was trying to make something terrifying seem like a game. "Hurricane comes and the whole village floods, kiddo. You know where we're going?" he'd said once, as they listened to the wind howl around the shack. "Under the cot?" she'd guessed, peering at the dusty space beneath it. He'd laughed. "Deeper than that. We'll hide in the belly of the shack. Nothing safer than the belly." At the time, she thought it was just one of his folksy phrases, like "land is leverage" and "never trust a man in a suit who hates mud." She had never actually asked him what the belly was. She'd pictured it as a metaphor, the foundation, the heart of the house, some sentimental nonsense. Now, with the words subsurface formations and existing caverns floating in her brain, it sounded a lot less metaphorical. She grabbed a flashlight from the crate, thumbed it on, and crouched down near the center of the shack. The floor was a patchwork of plywood and old boards, some original, some replaced. She pressed her palm against them, moved slowly, listening for hollow spots the way her grandfather had taught her to listen for leaks. Nothing. Just the dull, solid thud of wood over whatever was beneath. She shifted toward the corner where the slope was most obvious, near the back wall. There, the boards looked slightly different, less worn, the nails newer and less rusted. She ran the beam of the flashlight along the cracks between them. At first, it was just a maze of dust and spider webs. Then her eyes adjusted to the pattern. Thin, straight gaps, not random. A faint rectangle traced in negative space, about 3 feet by 3, too regular to be an accident. Her heart gave an uncomfortable little kick. "Hello, belly," she whispered. She rested her fingers on the dial, took a breath, and turned it to 6, then backward past 0 to 11, then forward to 3. Nothing. The handle remained stubborn. "Too simple," she muttered. She tried 061103 again, but with the numbers doubled, halved, reversed. The safe remained unmoved. She stepped back, rolling her shoulders, trying to think like him. Her grandfather loved patterns. He'd taught her multiplication by making her skip count stair steps. He'd made up songs about prime numbers. She tried another approach, the date of the newspaper clipping about the stalled gas project, which had also shown up multiple times in the margins. No luck. She was about to give up and go upstairs to tear every other notebook apart when something caught her eye under the workbench. A strip of tape, old and curling, stuck to the underside of the top drawer. "Seriously?" she asked the empty cellar, half annoyed, half relieved. The tape's adhesive barely clung as she peeled it away. A small, tarnished key dropped into her palm. It was the kind made for safes, with a flattened circular head and a jagged tooth. "Okay, that's one part," she said, crouching in front of the safe again. The key slid into the small keyhole below the dial and turned smoothly with a soft internal click. The handle, however, still refused to move. "Of course you're a belt and suspenders kind of guy," she sighed. Key plus combination. He'd never trusted any single lock in his life. Why start now? She flipped through the notebook again, this time looking for anything that wasn't obviously a date or a measurement. Near the back, on a page mostly blank except for a grocery list, there sat a small grouping of numbers stacked like a mini-column. 194703. No labels, no explanation, just those three numbers, written a little darker as if his pen had paused there. 1947-3. She thought of his year of birth, 1947, her birth year, 1993, the land purchase date on the deed, 1973. "Okay," she told the safe, "one more dance." She reset the dial, turning it a few full rotations to clear whatever imaginary slate needed clearing, the way she'd seen in movies. 19, she said, turning clockwise. The dial ticked under her fingers, old grease humming softly inside. 47, counterclockwise, past 0, then back. 3, clockwise again. She held her breath and tried the handle. It didn't move. "Fine," she hissed. "How about your year first, then the land, then me?" She tried 47-73-93, then 73-47-03, using the last two digits of that circled date. Nothing. Her frustration boiled over. She slapped the side of the safe with her palm, more petulant than strategic. The sound that came back wasn't the dead thud of unyielding metal. It was a faint, sympathetic clunk from inside, like something heavy had shifted a fraction of an inch. She froze. "There you are," she whispered. Okay, so one of the combinations had done something, or the key and her random flailing had jolted something loose. Either way, she was closer. She went up the stairs again, grabbed another notebook, this one older, pages more yellow than white. Halfway through, she found it, a line of numbers written carefully along the top margin, then crossed out, then written again in slightly darker ink. 06-11-47. June 11th, 1947. His birthday, and she realized with a little jolt the date that appeared on the original land deed copy in the box, the day he'd signed for the parcel. "A sentimental old bastard," she said, affection and exasperation braided together. She went back down, wiped her sweaty hand on her jeans, and spun the dial. 6, clockwise. 11, counter. 47, clockwise again. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. She tried the handle. For a second, nothing happened. Then, with a reluctant metallic thunk, the mechanism gave. The handle moved under her hand, turning slowly until something inside released. The door cracked open on a thin line, exhaling a breath of air even older than the cellar's. Madeline stared at it, suddenly afraid to see whatever he'd hidden so carefully that he'd tied the lock to the day he became himself and the land's owner. "Okay," she said, barely above a whisper. "Show me what you were protecting." She slid her fingers under the edge of the door and lifted. Inside, under a faint sprinkling of rust dust and the ghost of oil, lay a neatly stacked bundle of legal documents. Some bore the county seal, others carried the letterheads of companies she didn't recognize. Her family name, Williams, showed up in bold on several of them. And on top, in a clear plastic sleeve, lay a thick, unsigned lease agreement stamped with a logo she did recognize, even in its older, clunkier font. Alaman Infrastructure Group, LLC. Her eyes locked on the name at the top of the contract, Raymond J. Williams, lessor. Below it, Alaman Infrastructure Group, LLC, lessee. Her grandfather's name, their name. The belly of the shack had been holding more than just tools. It had been holding proof that the fight over this patch of land had started long before a billionaire ever drove up in a black SUV with $500 in his hand. For a long moment, Madeline just stared at the logo on the sleeve. Alaman Infrastructure Group, LLC. Not Alaman Grid, an older, clunkier name, but the same surname, the same stylized A inside a circle, just with less polish and more serif. So this wasn't new. This wasn't some new brand interest in cleaning up blight. This was a second pass at something her grandfather had already fought about once. She slid the lease agreement out of the plastic, her pages rasped against each other, stiff with age and careful storage. Her grandfather's name leapt out at her from the top of the first page in bold type. Lessor, Raymond J. Williams. Underneath, in matching bold, lessee, Alaman Infrastructure Group, LLC. She skimmed the opening paragraphs, mind snagging on every other word, hereinafter referred to as cavern, subterranean rights, reservoir. The more she read, the more the word cavern showed up. Granting lessee exclusive right of access to the subterranean salt formation located approximately 2,500 to 3,000 feet beneath the property. She flipped to the next page, fingers leaving faint smudges on the paper. To be compensated at a rate of dollars per annum. The blank had been filled in, then scribbled over so hard the paper nearly tore. Beside it, in caps, if they want it this badly, it's worth 10 times what they're saying. Her mouth twisted in something that wasn't quite a smile. Sound familiar, she murmured. He'd seen it, even then, the way people with money tried to lowball you, tell you you're lucky just to be invited to your own exploitation. She flipped to the last page. The signature line for Alaman Infrastructure Group, LLC, was signed with a name she didn't recognize, some junior executive or lawyer. The line for Raymond J. Williams was blank. Below it, in pencil, her grandfather had written just one word: no. She sat down on the cold floor of the cellar, the lease agreement spread over her knees, and laughed. It came out thin and slightly hysterical, echoing off the concrete. He hadn't signed. Whatever leverage they'd tried to take back then, he'd refused to give it to them. And then, instead of telling his granddaughter what he'd just told a room full of corporate lawyers, he'd locked the whole fight away in a steel box under the shack. Land is leverage, she said under her breath. You stubborn old mule. There were other documents in the safe. She spent the next hour pulling them out, laying them in careful stacks on the workbench, her flashlight propped up in an empty jar to give her both hands. On one page, a paragraph caught her eye. Together with all appurtenances and hereditaments thereto belonging, including, without limitation, all mineral and subsurface rights associated with said parcel. Someone, her grandfather or a county clerk, had underlined mineral and subsurface rights. She flipped through the later filings looking for any mention that those rights had been sold off or severed. Nothing. Every transfer was straightforward, from the seller to her grandfather, from her grandfather's estate to
her. She found the probate document that felt like punishment at the time, the thing that dropped this land into her lap when all she wanted was a normal apartment and a landlord who fixed things. There it was, in black and white. Beneficiary, Madeline Claire Williams, to receive fee simple title to the property located at such and such address, including any and all mineral and subsurface rights not previously conveyed. She exhaled slowly, the air of the cellar condensing in front of her lips like a ghost. Not previously conveyed. And according to everything in this safe, nothing had. No easement.
No lease, no signed paper handing the belly of the earth to Alamon's people. Her grandfather had closed the door and thrown the bolt, then died with the combination and the argument in his head. And by default, that made her the one with her hand on the lock now. "Okay," she said to the maps, the safe, the concrete. "Okay." It was one thing to suspect, to feel in your bones that something important lay under your feet. It was another to see your name underlined on a legal document that said, in the most boring language possible, you own the hole they want. That thought scared her more than the dark stairs had. She needed help, someone who lived in the world of deeds and easements and companies that liked to rename themselves every few years to shed old sins. Someone she trusted, at least a little. She went back upstairs, blinking as the warm, bright air of the shack grabbed her by the throat. The generator had settled into its usual cough rumble. The hatch gaped open like the trap door of a magic trick. Her phone sat on the crate next to the stack of bills. She picked it up and scrolled through her contacts, thumb hovering. Tina. They hadn't talked in months. Ever since high school, their lives had spun out in different directions. Tina into community college and then a steady job at the Harris County Clerk's office. Madeline into odd jobs, emergency rooms, and trying not to lose the shack. If anyone knew how to dig through land records, it would be the woman who lived buried in them 8 hours a day. She hit call before she could talk herself out of it. The line rang twice. "This is Tina," came the familiar voice, brisk and distracted. "Hey," Madeline said, "it's Maddie from the shack." That got a laugh, short and surprised. "Oh my God, I was just thinking about you last week. You still out in rich people land?" "Unfortunately," she said. "Listen, I have a weird question. How hard is it to check if someone ever recorded an easement or lease on a specific piece of property?" There was a tiny pause on the other end. "It depends," Tina said slowly. "Is this a theoretical question or the kind that comes with a lawsuit later?" "Probably the second kind," Madeline admitted. "Well, lucky for you, I'm bored and I like chaos. You free this afternoon?" The Harris County Records Building downtown was the opposite of the shack in almost every way. High ceilings, fluorescent lights, air conditioning so aggressive it could probably keep meat fresh. But beneath the sterile surface, it had the same feeling of being built on layers and layers of story. Rows of computers stretched out in a self-service area, half occupied by people hunched over screens looking at plat maps and divorce decrees. Beyond that, shelves of old ledger books lined a wall like something out of a library-themed dream. Tina met her by the front desk, ID badge clipped to her cardigan, hair pulled back in a messy morning that saw better days. "You look like someone who hasn't slept," Tina said by way of greeting. "I found a bunker under my house, so, busy week." Tina blinked. "We're going to circle back to that," she said. "Come on." She shepherded Madeline to an empty terminal and logged in with the ease of someone who did this in her sleep. "Give me your parcel information," she said. Madeline slid a folded copy of the deed across the desk. Tina typed in the legal description, Lot X, Block Y, such and such subdivision, and hit Enter. A list of documents populated the screen. Deeds, tax liens, HOA filings, each line a little breadcrumb trail through decades. "Okay," Tina said, "we've got the original sale to your grandfather,
probate transfer to you, few tax things. No oil and gas lease, no recorded easements beyond standard utility. What about any leases to a company with Alaman in the name? Madeline asked, leaning closer. Tina adjusted the filters, pulled up any documents tied to the Williams parcel. After a minute, she shook her head. Nothing. If they did paperwork with him, it never made it through our doors. They did, Madeline said. I have a copy. He just never signed it. She explained in low, rushed sentences about the safe, the maps, the cavern, the lease with the old Alaman entity, about the new offers, the drone, the code inspector who magically appeared after she turned down 10 grand. Tina swiveled in her chair, eyes wide. You are kidding me. I wish, Madeline said. Tell me I'm overreacting, she added, even though she already knew the answer. Tina didn't oblige her. Okay, she said instead, fingers flying over the keyboard. Let's see what Mr. Green Energy Billionaire's been up to lately. They switched search terms. This time, they looked up Alaman companies, not Williams. Results flooded in, subsidiary after subsidiary, LLCs with names like AG Houston Storage Holdings and Bayou Resiliency Partners. Tina clicked through them, brow furrowing. Here we go, she said, pulling up a memorandum of understanding filed with some alphabet soup board. They've been busy. One document linked to a state-level application for permits to utilize existing subsurface salt formations in West Harris County for the purpose of grid-scale energy storage. No specific parcel mentioned, but the coordinates lined up eerily with the red blob on her grandfather's map. Another filing, this time with a different regulatory body, attached technical reports referencing Cavern H3 and adjacent access points now held via long-term option agreements with surface owners. Except not with you, Tina pointed out, because you never signed anything, and we'd have a record if your grandfather had. Madeline stared at the screen. So they're telling the state they've got this thing locked up, when the one piece they actually need is me. Tina clicked over to a different window, and they're telling Wall Street the same thing. She pulled up a public SEC filing, dense text, charts, risk factors, all the corporate confession and spin condensed into one soul-numbing document. At first, the words ran together. Then a section title jumped out at her. Key Assets and Competitive Advantages. Beneath it, paragraphs describing a secured, proprietary underground storage asset in West Houston, one that would provide the backbone for Alaman Grid's Texas Resiliency Initiative. There was talk of capacity, megawatt hours, strategic positioning, and a line that made her skin crawl. Our West Houston subsurface storage site is fully secured via long-term access arrangements and presents no material title risk. Material title risk, Tina read out loud. That's you, babe, or rather, that's the thing they're pretending you're not. Madeline's hand tightened on the edge of the desk. If she did nothing, this would all go through. Investors would throw money at Alaman Grid, comforted by assurances that the underground vault holding all that resilience was fully under the company's control. If she raised her hand at the wrong moment and said, actually, not so much, she could wipe a few billion off the table in a single news cycle. Her stomach swooped a little at the thought. Not with glee, she wasn't that naive, but with the dizzy sense of standing on a cliff and realizing that technically you could jump. All of their projections, she said slowly, all of their numbers are built on this cavern. It looks like it, Tina said. If that thing falls through, the IPO's a very different animal. And they don't have the right to use it without me. If your paperwork is what you say it is, then no, Tina agreed. At least not without exposing themselves to lawsuits and regulatory headaches that would make every investor in this filing break out in hives. She leaned back, crossed her arms. This is real, and it looks very real. That means two things. One, you're sitting on a gold mine that could change your life. And two, They are not going to play nice with you." "I noticed," Madeline said dryly. "They already sent code enforcement after my house." "That's the polite phase," Tina said. "Next phase is less polite. You need to be careful, and you need a lawyer who does more than write wills for old ladies." "I can't afford a lawyer," Madeline said automatically. "You might not be able to afford not to," Tina shot back. Then her tone softened. "Look, for now, keep everything. Multiple copies, different places. Don't give them originals. Don't sign anything. And if random cars start sitting outside your house, call me, or call the cops, or both." On the way back to the bus stop, with copies of the key filings in a folder under her arm, Madeline kept checking her reflection in store windows to see if she looked different. She didn't. Still the same woman in worn jeans and a faded t-shirt, hair pulled back, dark circles under her eyes from not enough sleep and too much worry. But inside, it felt like someone had taken her life and quietly rotated it 90 degrees. Same pieces, new orientation. A dark sedan idled across the street as she walked, a dark sedan with tinted windows. It pulled out a few seconds after she passed, turned when she turned, hung 2 car lengths behind her for 3 blocks. Her pulse picked up. At the next intersection, she stopped to tie an already tied shoelace and let the light cycle through once more than she had to. The sedan rolled by, driver's face invisible behind the glare. Paranoid, she told herself. Practical, another part of her countered. By the time she reached the bus stop, the car was gone, but the feeling of being watched clung to her all the way home. That night, the shack's belly felt less like a secret hideout and more like a war room. She spread the old maps on the workbench, weighing the corners down with jars and tools. Next to them, she laid the fresh printouts Tina had helped her pull, screenshots of filings, highlighted paragraphs, a copy of the SEC page with "no material title risk" underlined 3 times in red. On one side, her grandfather's hand-drawn cavern, shaded and labeled with an X under her lot. On the other, a glossy corporate diagram of a West Houston subsurface storage asset, all clean blue lines and jargon. Same shape, same location, same hole in the ground, different stories about who owned the plug. Madeline leaned on the workbench, palms flat, head hanging between her shoulders. Upstairs, the shack creaked as the night wind came up off the bayou. Somewhere outside, a car door slammed, a dog barked, someone laughed, the ordinary sounds of a neighborhood that had no idea it was perched over a vault worth more than all their houses put together. She straightened slowly, eyes tracing the lines between map and filing, between her grandfather's "no" in pencil and Alaman's "no material title risk" in corporate speak. A rusted shack, a safe under the floor, a billionaire's frantic lowball offer. She had thought for years that she was just the woman who wouldn't sell. Now, staring at the paper proof spread across the belly of the shack, Madeline realized something else. Somehow, without meaning to, she'd ended up standing in the doorway of a global energy story, and she was the only one who could decide who got to walk through. For the next 2 days, the shack felt like it was holding its breath with her. Madeline went through the motions, watering the garden, coaxing the generator through another tantrum, trying to pretend the world hadn't tilted, but everything was slightly off, like she was living in a replica of her life instead of the real thing. The maps and filings stayed spread out on the workbench in the belly of the shack. Every time she climbed down the steps, the same thought hit her. If someone else got in here first, she'd lose more than just paper. She'd lose her only proof that she wasn't crazy. She bought a cheap lockbox from a big box store and hid copies of the most important documents in it: the old lease, the deed, the cavern map, the SEC page about no material title risk. She stuck the box into a duffel bag and shoved it under the back of her cot, the closest thing she had to a safe outside the safe. Tina's warnings echoed in her head. They are not going to play nice with you. Turned out, Tina was on schedule. On the third morning, the shiny cars arrived. Not a mud-spattered truck, not code enforcement. 3 sleek sedans glided onto the street like they were in a commercial. One black, one silver, one the exact color of a polished threat. They parked in a neat line along the curb facing her lot. Madeline was on her knees in the garden, fingers in the dirt when the doors opened. 2 men and a woman climbed out. All 3 wore suits that probably cost more than her yearly electric bill, if she had an electric bill. They carried leather portfolios, reusable coffee cups with a logo she couldn't see from here, and confident, busy expressions. They did not look at the shack the way the neighbors did. They assessed it, like a patient or a crime scene. "Miss Williams?" the woman called, picking her way across the edge of the lot to avoid the mud. "That's me," Madeline said, rising slowly. She wiped her hands on the seat of her jeans and deliberately did not apologize for the dirt. "I'm Allison Craig, Collins Martian Tate. We spoke to you via correspondence recently." "The pink letter, right. Can't say I loved the tone." Allison gave a little laugh like that was adorably feisty. "We're here today with some good news, actually. May we—" She gestured vaguely toward the shack, like asking permission to enter a museum. "Sure," Madeline said. "Just don't lean on anything that looks like it's doing important structural work." They picked their way onto the patch of flatter ground by the door. One of the men, shorter, sharply parting his hair like it was a legal requirement, opened his portfolio and took out a stack of bound pages. "We appreciate you taking the time to meet with us," Allison said. Up close, Madeline could see the faint lines at the corners of her eyes, the subtle weariness of someone who lived on caffeine and conference calls. "Our client asked us to bring you a revised proposal." "Your client being Blackbriar Redevelopment, or are we going to start using their real name now?" The shorter man's eyes ticked up, then away. Allison didn't flinch. "Our client works through several entities," she said smoothly. "But the relevant point is this: they've significantly increased their offer." She handed over the top document with a little flourish, like presenting a prize on a game show. Madeline took it warily. The number hit her first. Not 10,000, not even close. $750,000. She read it twice to make sure she hadn't hallucinated a zero. $750,000. Her hands went slightly numb around the paper. "You understand," Allison said gently. "This is, well, above market for a structure in this condition." "In this condition," repeated the taller man, like an echo with opinions. Madeline's brain tried to do 3 things at once and failed. Imagine that much money, remember her grandfather's notes, and calculate how many property tax bills she could wallpaper the shack with if she wanted to. $750,000 could buy her a house that didn't leak. It could pay off every debt she had, float her through years of not worrying about whether the generator would start, give her options she'd never dared to picture in more than fuzzy outline.
It could also, she reminded herself, be very expensive hush money. Her gaze dropped to the dense paragraphs below the number. "Why the change of heart?" she asked, not looking up. "You were very attached to the $10,000 figure last time we spoke." Allison shrugged, professional and light. "After further internal review, our client concluded that the property has strategic value beyond the merely aesthetic. They're prepared to recognize that value. This arrangement would give you financial stability and allow the neighborhood to move forward with its," she glanced at the shack, "development goals." "Strategic value," Madeline repeated. "That wouldn't happen to have anything to do with a big underground hole full of future electricity, would it?" A brief silence. The taller man shifted his weight. The shorter one cleared his throat. Ms. Williams, Allison said carefully, as you know, certain subsurface formations in the county have been identified as potential sites for energy infrastructure. That's public information. And my name is public information in their filings? Madeline asked, because last time I checked, I was a ghost in those. No one answered that, not directly. Why don't we walk through the key terms, Allison said, as if they were discussing cable plans. They stepped up onto the shallow porch, the shack's door hung open, the lantern from last night still on the crate, everything inside painfully small and worn in contrast to the crisp stack of paper in Madeline's hands. She scanned the purchase and sale section, skimming over the familiar language about granting all right, title, and interest in the property. The number kept flickering at the top of her vision, $750,000. Then she found it, including, without limitation, all improvements thereon and all appurtenances, easements, and hereditments thereto appertaining, including all subsurface, mineral, and cavern rights, and any and all rights in and to any underground formations, cavities, voids, or reservoirs or salt structures lying beneath the property. Her pen, she'd grabbed on autopilot, went to work. Circle, underline, star. Below that, seller acknowledges that buyer and its affiliates may have previously accessed or utilized such subsurface formations and agrees that this agreement shall constitute full and final settlement of any claims arising from such prior access or use. Circle, star, a little doodled middle finger this time. On the next page, a section titled Confidentiality, Non-Disclosure. Seller agrees, it read, not to disclose to any third party, including but not limited to media, regulators, or potential adversarial parties, any information regarding the existence, negotiation, or terms of this agreement, or any information regarding the subsurface formations, caverns, or storage operations conducted by buyer or its affiliates beneath or adjacent to the property. If she breached, the next paragraph said, she'd owe them liquidated damages in an amount that made her eyes widen. So, she said slowly, you're offering to buy my land and the whole under it, retroactively bless any trespassing you've already done down there, and make it so I can never talk to anyone about it. And if I do, I owe you more money than I will ever see in my life. Allison's smile thinned a millimeter. It's standard, she said. Our client needs certainty. This is a complex industrial project. Loose talk could confuse matters unnecessarily. Confuse who? Madeline asked. Regulators? Investors? The people who built their houses on top of a giant battery no one told them about? The taller man spoke for the first time, voice edged in impatience. Ms. Williams, he said, this project is going to provide resilience for the entire region, backup power, grid stability, storm protection. It's cutting-edge infrastructure. It's not some villain's lair. Then why do you need me to pretend it doesn't exist? She countered. All three lawyers opened their mouths at once, then closed them as a new engine sound joined the generator's rumble. A familiar black SUV rolled up to the curb. Madeline felt her stomach drop and harden at the same time. Of course. The back door opened. Richard Alleman stepped out, suit a shade lighter than last time, tie a touch more casual, like he'd dressed down to come talk to the peasants. Allison, he said pleasantly, nodding to the lawyer. Gentlemen. His gaze slid past them to Madeline. Ms. Williams, he said, warmth turned up a few degrees. May I? He didn't wait for an answer before stepping onto her lot. Richard, Allison said tight-lipped, we were just reviewing terms. We haven't— It's fine, he said smoothly. I wanted to drop by personally. Last time we met, I don't think I fully conveyed who I was or what we're trying to do here. Oh, you conveyed, Madeline said. You just left a few $1 billion worth of context out. His mouth twitched. Fair, he said. It's hard to summarize an entire company in a driveway. He looked around at the shack with that same assessing gaze as before, but this time there was something else in it.
Respect, maybe, or wariness. "I'm not just a local investor," he said. "You've probably figured that out. Figured it out when your face tried to sell me resilience on the morning news," he said. "I run Alaman Grid. We're building systems that keep lights on when storms knock everything else out. Hospitals, shelters, homes. We're taking existing infrastructure, like that cavern under your feet, and turning it into something that actually serves people, not just oil companies." He stepped a little closer, lowering his voice like they were sharing a secret. "What we're doing here, in Houston, is the prototype. If it works, other cities copy it. If it doesn't, people keep dying in blackouts. That's the scale we're talking about." Allison and the other lawyers watched him with the impassive expressions of people who'd seen this speech before. "You could have done this anywhere," Madeline said, "but you picked the one cavern where some stubborn old man drew an X and wrote his granddaughter's future on it." He smiled faintly. "We picked the best formation," he said. "The fact that your grandfather was smart enough to see what it was decades ago is, frankly, impressive." "He was smart enough not to sign your first bad deal," she said, holding up the old lease in its plastic sleeve. "Funny how that part never made it into your pitch." Richard's eyes flicked to the document and back. "That was a different company," he said. "Different time, different priorities." "Same last name on the letterhead," she pointed out. He didn't deny that. "Look," he said, shifting tactics, "you've been treated unfairly by this neighborhood. I get that. I grew up not too far from here, in a house that would have made these people clutch their pearls. I know what it feels like to be the one lowering the property values just by existing." He gestured at the contract in her hand. "This changes that," he said. "You walk away with enough money to live wherever you want. You're not the woman in the shack anymore. You're the woman who helped kickstart a project that literally keeps the power on. You'll be part of something bigger than all of us, quietly, safely." There it was, the temptation wrapped in altruism. She let herself picture it just for a heartbeat. A small house somewhere that didn't smell like rust and gasoline, a real bed, windows that closed properly, a savings account that wasn't always one medical bill away from zero. She pictured walking into a realtor's office and having them take her seriously because she was paying cash. Pictured never hearing "Maddie from the shack" again unless it was in a story she chose to tell. $750,000 could buy her out of a lot of bad memories, but it couldn't buy one thing back, the right to tell the truth about what was under her. She looked down at the confidentiality clause again. "Explain something to me," she said. "If what you're doing is so vital and noble and above board, why do I have to pretend it never happened? Why can't I say, yeah, I leased my cavern to Alaman Grid and now they're saving the world with it?" Richard's expression didn't flicker. The muscles in his jaw did. "Because markets are skittish," he said, "because regulators latch on to anything that looks like uncertainty, because if a story starts floating around that some woman in a shack can hold up a multi-billion-dollar infrastructure project because of paperwork quirk from the 90s, people who don't understand the context will panic." "Context like you built an entire business plan on a hole you don't own?" she asked. "We have options," he said evenly. "We've secured multiple access points. Your parcel is unique, strategically helpful, but not singular." Allison's eyes flickered at that, the tiniest betrayal. If they really had other clean routes into the cavern, they wouldn't be here with coffee and 7 figures and a non-disclosure muzzle. "And yet," Madeline said softly, "here you are." A beat of silence stretched between them. His smile lost some of his warmth. "I'm trying to avoid a situation that ends with lawyers getting rich and everyone else losing. If this turns into a public fight, who do you think gets hurt the most? You, a woman with no legal team, living in a non-compliant structure the city's already eyeing? Or me, with a company full of attorneys and a PR department?" The threat wasn't in the words, it was in the way he didn't quite say them. "Condemnation can move a lot faster than
The SEC, he added, almost gently. Civil litigation is expensive, stressful, years of your life. Meanwhile, we're trying to do something good here. You could make this easy for yourself and for a lot of other people. Madeline felt her throat tighten, part anger, part something uncomfortably like fear. He wasn't wrong about some of it. If this turned ugly, she'd be David standing in front of Goliath's IPO with a rock and a bad credit score. "I'm not signing this today," she said, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. "I need time. I need someone who doesn't work for you to look at it." Allison jumped in. "Of course," she said smoothly. "We understand this is a big decision, but I do have to emphasize, the offer as written is time-sensitive. Our client has filing deadlines with federal agencies. Delays could have ramifications." Madeline smiled without humor. "Seems like you should have thought about that before pretending I didn't exist in your filings." Richard's gaze cooled a fraction. "You're not the villain here, Miss Williams," he said. "I don't want you to end up thinking that if this goes sideways." "What am I, then?" she asked. "Collateral damage? A rounding error? A line item under unforeseen complications?" He spread his hands, a gesture of someone who wanted to be seen as reasonable. "You're someone standing at a crossroads most people never get to. One road is a check that solves most of your problems. The other is noise, uncertainty, headlines that go away in a week but leave you with lawyer's bills for years. And a third road," she said quietly, "where I don't let you buy my silence at any price." He studied her for a long moment. For the first time since she'd met him, the charm dropped entirely. What was left was calculation. "You don't have to decide that today," he said at last. "Read the contract. Talk to whoever you need to. We'll give you a few days." Allison's head turned toward him sharply at "few," but she didn't contradict him. He stepped back from the porch. "Just remember," he added, "not every fight is worth winning if you burn yourself down in the process." The lawyers gathered their bags. Allison left a clean copy of the agreement on the crate, weighed down with a branded pen. Then they retreated to their shiny sedans, engines purring. The SUV was the last to pull away, Richard's profile briefly visible through the tinted glass as he glanced back at the shack. Then they were gone, the street folding back into its usual quiet. Madeline stood in the doorway, heart thudding, the contract staring up at her like a coiled snake. She picked it up and flipped to the last page, to the signature line with her name printed neatly beneath it. For a dangerous moment, she imagined what it would feel like to sign it. The release, the dizzy high of being able to say, "I am not trapped here anymore." Then she saw her grandfather's shaky pencil scrawl in her mind's eye, written under the unsigned lease. "No. Land is leverage." She grabbed a red pen and very carefully wrote "Not yet" in tiny letters above her name. Then she folded the contract, slid it into a folder with the old lease, and put the whole bundle down in the cellar safe, with the door propped open this time. She wasn't about to lock away the evidence of what they'd tried to make her swallow. That night, sleep was a lost cause. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw different futures. Herself in a little house with a porch swing, herself sitting in a courtroom while lawyers argued words she barely understood, herself on the curb watching a demolition crew tear down the shack because some judge had stamped "condemned" on her address. And beneath it all, the cavern, the invisible monster humming quietly under the village, waiting to be filled with power or lies or both. At 2 in the morning, she gave up pretending she'd rest. She pulled her laptop from under the cot, propped herself against the wall, and opened a browser. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. "If this is real, they're not going to play nice," Tina's voice in her head. Fine, then she'd stop playing nice too. She typed, "Hunters Creek Village Public Meetings Infrastructure." The city's website was not interested in being helpful at that hour. It looked like it had been designed sometime around the birth of the internet and never updated, a maze of broken links and PDFs that took forever to load on her weak signal.
She kept digging. Eventually, she found a calendar. There it was. Town Hall, Flood Mitigation and Utilities, Hunters Creek Community Center, open to public and press. Date, 1 week from now. Agenda, drainage, power outages, and long-term resilience planning. She stared at the words until they blurred. Her cursor hovered over the Register to Attend button. She imagined walking into that room with copies of the old lease, the deed, the SEC filing. Imagined standing at a public microphone and asking a simple question on the record. She imagined Richard watching the clip later, somewhere far above the ground she lived on, realizing his cheap cash offer had just turned into a very expensive problem. Her chest tightened, not entirely in a bad way. Madeline clicked Attend. The confirmation page loaded slowly, the progress wheel spinning. When it finally popped up, "You are registered," she exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She closed the laptop and lay back on the cot, staring at the ceiling. She wasn't just going to say no anymore. She was going to drag whatever they were hiding under Hunters Creek Village into the light and make them explain it in front of everyone. Madeline hadn't realized how loud paper could be until she heard her little printer choke on it. The thing was ancient, a hand-me-down from an office that had upgraded sometime during the Obama administration. It whirred and clicked, grinding each sheet through like it resented the work. "Come on," she urged, perched on the edge of the crate that doubled as her desk. "One more. You can do one more." A final page slid out, warm and slightly smeared at the edges. She caught it before it hit the floor and laid it carefully in the keep pile. Old lease, copied. Deed, copied. Excerpt from the SEC filing with the no material title risk line, copied, underlined, highlighted within an inch of its life. Beside the stack of paper sat a yellow legal pad filled with her own handwriting, phrases circled and recircled, questions rewritten until they stopped shaking on the page. "State your name. Keep it short. Ask a question. Don't give a speech," Tina had told her. Easy for someone to say when they didn't feel like their entire life was balancing on the head of a microphone. Her phone buzzed on the crate. A text from Tina. "You still breathing?" Madeline snorted and typed back. "Definition of breathing is flexible right now." The reply came fast. "You got this. Remember, you have facts, they have vibes and PR." She smiled, tension loosening a notch. "Any last-minute legal spells I should know about?" 3 dots pulsed. Regulators love the words title risk, unsecured, and unpermitted use. Investors hate the phrase material misrepresentation. But don't overdo it. You're not a lawyer. You're a human being with a deed and a story. Madeline stared at the legal pad again. She'd written and crossed out at least 10 different versions of what she wanted to say. At first, she'd tried to sound like the SEC filing. That lasted 2 sentences before she wanted to throw the pad across the room. In the end, she'd underlined one line 3 times. Ask why their filings say they own something that your deed says they don't. Simple, true, impossible to answer with a soundbite. The generator hiccuped outside. The shack's lights flickered and steadied. She gathered the printed pages, slid them into a cheap plastic folder she'd bought just for this, and stuffed the folder into her thrift store tote. On impulse, she grabbed her grandfather's notebook, too, the one with the cross-section sketch and the warning about what was underneath. "Okay, Ray," she said to the open hatch in the floor, "you started this. Let's see if I can finish it without getting flattened." The Hunters Creek Community Center looked like it had been designed by a committee that couldn't decide if it wanted to be a church, a school, or a country club. Brick facade, too many windows, a tasteful sign out front with the village logo etched into faux stone. The parking lot was already crowded when she walked up. SUVs, luxury sedans, a few trucks. A news van with a local station's logo splashed along its side nosed into a spot closest to the entrance, antenna already high-mast. "Great," she muttered. "They brought cameras." A cluster of residents was gathered by the double doors, talking in low voices. She caught snatches as she passed. If they start digging again, my yard is going to sink. I swear flooding was worse last year. At least they're doing something about the outages. Inside, the community center's main hall had been transformed into official meeting mode. Metal folding chairs lined up in rows, a long table up front draped in a navy cloth, little name placards and pitchers of water neatly arranged. A projector screen hung behind it, currently displaying a slide title, Hunters Creek Village, Flood and Power Resilience. The mayor, or whatever the tiny municipality called the person with the gavel, sat in the center of the table. A city engineer with rolled-up sleeves had a laptop open, a stack of charts beside him. To one side, a man in a blazer with an aluminium grid pen on his lap smiled at nothing in particular, his hands folded, the picture of corporate
Calm. Not Richard. Too young for one thing, and his eyes had the eager shine of someone still trying to climb the ladder. "Who's that?" Madeline murmured as Tina materialized at her elbow. "VP of Regional Community Engagement," Tina said. Translation, the guy they send when they don't want the CEO to get yelled at on TV. "You're here off the clock?" Madeline asked. "Lunch break," Tina said. "Very extended lunch break. Don't worry, I'm just a citizen today." She nudged Madeline toward an empty row. "Sit. Breathe. When they open the floor, you walk, you talk, you drop your little paper bombs. That's it." "Just that?" Madeline said faintly. "Just that," Tina echoed. "Hey." She squeezed Madeline's arm. "Remember, you're not lying. Remember that. They are going to sound confident, polished, very sure of their own goodness. But you're the only one up there with the actual land records for this specific hole. That matters." The room filled quickly. Homeowners with crisp polos and statement necklaces, a few younger people in jeans and t-shirts, at least one man in a fishing hat who looked like he'd been dragged there against his will. The news crew set up along the side, camera on a tripod, a reporter in a blazer checking her hair and her phone's selfie camera. Meetings started with the usual village theater, introductions, an agenda, a bad joke about flooding making everyone stay creatively flexible with their landscaping. Then the city engineer took over, pointing at slides, maps of the bayou, photos of flooded intersections, budget numbers for improved drainage. He talked about culverts and retention basins and temporary nuisance flooding, and the room murmured approvingly at the phrase grant funding. Finally, the aluminium grid representative's turn came. "Thank you, Mayor," he said, stepping up to the podium with a practiced half-smile. "My name's Daniel Cho. I'm here on behalf of aluminium grid to talk about how we're working with your community to ensure that what happened during the last big storm, those rolling blackouts, that uncertainty, never happens again." He clicked the remote. The projector showed a sleek animation, a stylized Houston, lights flickering, then stabilizing as blue lines flowed from an underground blob labeled West Houston Storage Facility to little house icons. "We're leveraging existing salt formations beneath West Harris County to create a kind of battery for the grid. When the wind's blowing and the sun's shining, we store excess energy. When storms hit, when demand spikes, we release it. It's safer, cleaner, and more resilient than anything we've had before." Words like cutting edge, public-private partnership, and no cost to taxpayers rolled out of him as if someone had wound him up and set him on a table. Madeline's jaw clenched. On the slide, the blob representing the cavern glowed a calm, trustworthy blue. There was no little house icon on top of it, no asterisk linking to a footnote that read, "By the way, we don't actually have uncontested access to this thing." When he got to the risk management section, he tossed out the phrase, "fully secured title," like it was nothing, like it belonged right next to industry-leading safety protocols. Tina scribbled something on her program and slid it over. She'd written, in all caps, "No material title risk equals the lie." The presentation ended with a slide that said, "Working together for a resilient Hunters Creek," and a photo of a multiracial group of people in hard hats smiling at a sunset. "If there are no initial questions from council, we'll open the floor to public comment in a few minutes," the mayor said. The council members did their dance, a few softball questions about noise, traffic, property values. Daniel handled them smoothly. No, there wouldn't be drilling in backyards. Yes, they were working closely with regulators. No, homeowners had no reason to be concerned about subsurface activity. Everything is completely secured and compliant, he said, the phrase polished from repetition. Madeline's fingers dug into the folder on her lap. The plastic crinkled. Okay, the mayor said at last, reaching for a sign-up sheet on the edge of the table. We'll now open the floor to public comment. As always, please keep your remarks under 2 minutes, state your name and address for the record, and remember we're here to have a constructive conversation. A line formed by the standing microphone in the aisle. A man in a golf shirt went first, complaining about runoff from a new development. A woman in a floral dress asked whether the batteries could explode under our houses. Daniel reassured her with phrases like redundant safety systems and non-flammable media. Tina nudged Madeline. Now, she whispered. Madeline's legs felt like they belonged to someone else as she stood. The folder weighed 10 pounds. The eyes of everyone in her row tracked her as she stepped into the aisle. The camera turned toward her, lens a dark, unblinking pupil. She took her place in line, 1 person in front of her, 2 behind. She could hear her own heartbeat louder than the murmur of the crowd. You have facts, she told herself. They have vibes. The homeowner in front of her finished a rambling comment about mosquito control. The mayor glanced at the clock. Next, please. Her turn. She stepped up to the microphone. It was slightly too tall. She adjusted it, the metal squealing in the quiet. Please state your name and address for the record, the mayor prompted. Her mouth felt dry. Madeleine Williams, she said. Her voice sounded weirdly loud. 14, she rattled off her address. Hunters Creek Village. There was a small rustle as people put 2 and 2 together. Some heads turned, a couple of eyebrows shot up. Someone whispered, "That's the shack." Go ahead, Miss Williams, the mayor said. She opened the folder, more for something to do with her hands than anything else. The copies inside gleamed white. My question is for Mr. Cho, she said, keeping her eyes on the alderman rep instead of the crowd. In your SEC filings, you describe that underground facility as a secured proprietary asset and say there's no material title risk associated with it, correct? A flicker of surprise crossed his face that she'd read those. Yes, he said, recovering fast. So, she continued, and in your presentation just now, you told everyone here that the site is fully secured, that you have all the access you need. That's right, he said, nodding. We've secured the necessary. So, she said, cutting in gently, can you explain why my deed, she held up a copy, paper trembling just slightly, still shows me as the owner of the only surface parcel marked as surface access to that cavern on original survey maps, and why your lawyers have been pressuring me to sign away my subsurface rights and an NDA that would prevent me from talking to regulators or the media about it. The room went very, very quiet. The mayor's eyebrows climbed so high they nearly left his forehead. The camera swung fully toward her now, red recording light steady. Miss Williams, Daniel said, his smile freezing around the edges. I'm not sure I... She lifted the old lease copy with the other hand, the alderman infrastructure logo visible even from several rows back. This is a draft lease your predecessor company offered my grandfather decades ago. He didn't sign it. There's no record of any easement or access agreement filed with the county after that. But your filings tell investors you have uncontested, long-term control of the cavern. Your lawyers showed up at my house last week with a new contract, offering me $750,000 to sell everything under my property and sign a non-disclosure so I can't mention it to media, regulators, or adversarial parties. She quoted that last bit verbatim. Let him hear his own words echoed back. Murmurs rippled through the room, a tide surging from the back row to the front. Non-disclosure? Lawyers? $750,000? On the side, the reporter's eyes had gone wide. She signaled frantically to her cameraman to zoom in. I'm trying to understand, Madeline said, heart hammering, how you can tell the SEC and the people in this room that everything is fully secured when the person whose name is on the deed hasn't agreed to anything yet. Is that what Alaman Grid considers no material title risk? Daniel's smile was gone now.
His jaw tightened in a very familiar way. "Miss Williams," he said, keeping his voice calm with visible effort, "I can't comment on individual negotiations with landowners in a public forum. There are confidential—" "You mean the NDA your lawyers want me to sign, right? But I can assure you," he continued, steamrolling, "that our legal team has reviewed all necessary documents and we are in full compliance with all applicable regulations." Then why are they trying so hard to retroactively legalize prior access or use of the cavern under my lot? That's what the clause says, word for word. Someone in the audience actually said, "What?" out loud. "This isn't the venue," the mayor began, clearly regretting his life choices. "With respect, Mayor," Madeline said, turning to him, "you put utilities and resilience on the agenda. You invited Grid to tell us how safe and secure this new underground facility is. I'm trying to find out why they need me to promise never to talk to you or the SEC or anyone else about what's under my shack in order for their numbers to work." She heard Tina's phrase in her head and let it out before she chickened out. "It sounds to me like a material misrepresentation." The words landed like a dropped wrench. On the city side of the table, the attorney for the village suddenly looked much more awake. The reporter mouthed the phrase to herself, already writing the lower third in her mind. "Local woman accuses energy giant of misleading investors." "Miss Williams," Daniel said, his tone shifting from warm to clipped, "I'd be happy to discuss any concerns you have privately with counsel present so we don't confuse things for community members who may not have all the context."
"Or so there's no record," Madeline said. "I think we're getting off topic," the mayor tried again, gavel twitching under his hand. "The topic is whether this infrastructure is actually as locked down and safe as they're telling you," Madeline said. "Part of safety is knowing who has control. Right now, my deed and their story don't match. I think that's worth talking about." She took a breath, forcing herself to stop there. "Ask a question, don't give a speech." "I guess my question is," she finished, "why should we trust a company that can't be honest about who owns the plug on its flagship project?" Silence. Then slowly, scattered applause. A few claps at first, then more as people who knew nothing about deeds or caverns but recognized someone poking a stick at power decided they liked it. The mayor banged his gavel half-heartedly. "Let's maintain decorum, please." "Thank you for your comment, Ms. Williams," he added, which was local government code for "please stop setting small fires in my meeting." Daniel cleared his throat. "Grid remains committed to transparency and regulatory compliance," he said, voice tight. "We welcome any and all reviews from the appropriate authorities." Translation, Madeline thought, "We are definitely calling our lawyers as soon as we get to the parking lot." She stepped away from the mic, legs buzzing. As she walked back to her seat, she could feel eyes tracking her, some approving, some angry, some calculating. "Holy shit," Tina whispered when she sat down. "I knew you were going to say something. I didn't know you were going to drop a grenade." "Too much?" Madeline asked, nausea and adrenaline competing in her gut. "Perfect," Tina said. "Terrifying, but perfect." The meeting limped on for another 20 minutes, but the air had gone out of the room. Every question about drainage or traffic now curved inevitably toward Grid. "Is our access actually secured?" one council member asked. "What happens if there's a title dispute?" another chimed in. Daniel answered with phrases like, "No comment on hypothetical scenarios," and "Our legal team is confident," but the sheen had worn off. The word misrepresentation hung over his head like a storm cloud. As soon as the mayor adjourned, the room exploded into motion. Neighbors clustered in little knots, talking fast. The council members beelined for the village attorney. Daniel spoke rapidly into his phone as he walked toward the exit, face turned away. The reporters descended on Madeline. "Ms. Williams, Kara Thompson, Channel 5 News," the woman in the blazer said, microphone already up like a reflex. "Can we talk to you for a moment on camera?" "Oh," Madeline said intelligently. Tina nudged her forward. "Yes, she can. 2 minutes." The cameraman adjusted the focus. The red light clicked on again. We're here at the Hunters Creek Community Center where a routine town hall on flooding and utilities just took a surprising turn. I'm joined by Madeline Williams, a local homeowner who says Alaman Grid may be using an underground storage site without secured access. Ms. Williams, can you explain what you told the council tonight? Madeline swallowed, suddenly very aware that whatever she said next might end up playing on repeat in break rooms and living rooms all over Houston. Sure, she said. I own one of the smallest, ugliest pieces of land in this neighborhood, but my deed says I also own the mineral and subsurface rights under it. My grandfather worked on the original surveys for the salt cavern Alaman Grid wants to use. He never signed away our access point. I've checked with the county and there's no recorded lease or easement. She held up the folder slightly so the camera could see the edges. I have an unsigned lease from an older Alaman company, and I have a new contract their lawyers brought me last week offering me a lot of money to sign away my rights and agree not to talk to regulators or the media about what's under my property. And you believe the company is misrepresenting its control of the site to investors? Kara prompted. I believe their filings say everything is fully secured when they know there's at least one owner they don't have an agreement with. That seems like something investors and regulators would want to know. Are you planning legal action? Kara asked. Right now, I'm just trying to not get evicted, honesty slipping out before she could smooth it. But I also don't think a billion-dollar company gets to build its future on pretending I don't exist. The reporter's eyes gleamed. Thank you, Ms. Williams. She turned back to the camera, launching into a wrap-up about serious questions and potential regulatory review. Across the room, Daniel left in a hurry, phone glued to his ear. He did not look over. By the time Madeline made it outside, her head was pounding. The parking lot glittered under the streetlights, concrete still radiating the day's heat. A couple of neighbors approached her cautiously. Is it true about the cavern? One asked. It's true that they want me to shut up about it, she said. You can draw your own conclusions. Another neighbor, one of the HOA diehards, looked more annoyed than anything. You could tank our property values if this gets messy, she hissed. My bad, Madeline said. Forgot you lived on the only street in America where property values aren't already being inflated by lies. Tina snorted. They walked to the bus stop together. The news van pulled out ahead of them, already on its way to the station. You did good, Tina said, bumping her shoulder. I might have just painted a target on the shack, Madeline replied. Pretty sure the target was already there, Tina said. You just turned on a spotlight. Across town, in a glass building with a view of a different stretch of the bayou, the news played on a wall of screens. One of them showed Kara Thompson standing in front of the community center, gesturing animatedly. Beside her, the lower third banner read, Local woman, Alaman Grid using cavern without legal access. Another screen, tuned to a finance channel, had already snagged the clip and was running it on a loop while a panel of commentators looked concerned. In a corner office, high above the ground, Richard watched the footage with his jaw clenched so tightly his temples ached. Someone had paused the clip on the moment Madeline held up her folder. Her eyes were wide, but her voice on the recording was steady. I have an unsigned lease from an older Alaman company, and I have a new contract their lawyers brought me last week offering me a lot of money to sign away my rights and agree not to talk to regulators or the media about what's under my property. And you believe the company is misrepresenting its control of the site to investors? Kara prompted. I believe their filings say everything is fully secured when they know there's at least one owner they don't have an agreement with. That seems like something investors and regulators would want to know. Are you planning legal action? Kara asked. Right now, I'm just trying to not get evicted, honesty slipping out before she could smooth it. But I also don't think a billion-dollar company gets to build its future on pretending I don't exist. The reporter's eyes gleamed. Thank you, Ms. Williams. She turned back to the camera, launching into a wrap-up about serious questions and potential regulatory review. Across the room, Daniel left in a hurry, phone glued to his ear. He did not look over. By the time Madeline made it outside, her head was pounding. The parking lot glittered under the streetlights. concrete still radiating the day's heat. A couple of neighbors approached her cautiously. "Is it true about the cavern?" one asked. "It's true that they want me to shut up about it," she said. "You can draw your own conclusions." Another neighbor, one of the HOA diehards, looked more annoyed than anything. "You could tank our property values if this gets messy," she hissed. "My bad," Madeline said. "Forgot you lived on the only street in America where property values aren't already being inflated by lies." Tina snorted. They walked to the bus stop together. The news van pulled out ahead of them, already on its way to the station. "You did good," Tina said, bumping her shoulder. "I might have just painted a target on the shack," Madeline replied. "Pretty sure the target was already there," Tina said. "You just turned on a spotlight." Across town, in a glass building with a view of a different stretch of the bayou, the news played on a wall of screens. One of them showed Kara Thompson standing in front of the community center, gesturing animatedly. Beside her, the lower third banner read, "Local woman, Alaman grid using cavern without legal access." Another screen, tuned to a finance channel, had already snagged the clip and was running it on a loop while a panel of commentators looked concerned. In a corner office, high above the ground, Richard watched the footage with his jaw clenched so tightly his temples ached. Someone had paused the clip on the moment Madeline held up her folder. Her eyes were wide, but her voice on the recording was steady. "I have an unsigned lease from an older aluminium company, and I have a new contract their lawyers brought me last week offering me a lot of money to sign away my rights and agree not to talk to regulators or the media about what's under my property. And you believe the company is misrepresenting its control of the site to investors?" Kara prompted. "I believe their filings say everything is fully secured when they know there's at least one owner they don't have an agreement with. That seems like something investors and regulators would want to know." "Are you planning legal action?" Kara asked. "Right now, I'm just trying to not get evicted," honesty slipping out before she could smooth it. "But I also don't think $1 billion company gets to build its future on pretending I don't exist." The reporter's eyes gleamed. "Thank you, Ms. Williams." She turned back to the camera, launching into a wrap-up about serious questions and potential regulatory review. Across the room, Daniel left in a hurry, phone glued to his ear. He did not look over. By the time Madeline made it outside, her head was pounding. The parking lot glittered under the streetlights, concrete
still radiating the day's heat. A couple of neighbors approached her cautiously. "Is it true?" one asked. "About the cavern?" "It's true that they want me to shut up about it," she said. "You can draw your own conclusions." Another neighbor, one of the HOA diehards, looked more annoyed than anything. "You could tank our property values if this gets messy," she hissed. "My bad," Madeline said. "Forgot you lived on the only street in America where property values aren't already being inflated by lies." Tina snorted. They walked to the bus stop together. The news van pulled out ahead of them, already on its way to the station. "You did good," Tina said, bumping her shoulder. "I might have just painted a target on the shack," Madeline replied. "Pretty sure the target was already there," Tina said. "You just turned on a spotlight." Across town, in a glass building with a view of a different stretch of the bayou, the news played on a wall of screens. One of them showed Kara Thompson standing in front of the community center, gesturing animatedly. Beside her, the lower third banner read, "Local woman, aluminium grid using cavern without legal access." Another screen, tuned to a finance channel, had already snagged the clip and was running it on a loop while a panel of commentators looked concerned. In a corner office, high above the ground, Richard watched the footage with his jaw clenched so tightly his temples ached. Someone had paused the clip on the moment Madeline held up her folder. Her eyes were wide, but her voice on the recording was steady. "I have an unsigned lease from an older aluminium company," she was saying. "Their lawyers brought me last week, offering me a lot of money to sign away my rights and agree not to talk to regulators or the media." "Damn it," he said.
too softly for anyone outside the room to hear. His general counsel, a woman with steel-gray hair and a reputation for never panicking, stood at his shoulder, arms crossed. Local news at 6, finance blogs by 8, Wall Street Journal by morning. She ticked off the progression. We're going to get calls. We already are, said the IR director from the doorway, phone in hand. 3 major funds want clarification on our title position in West Houston, and there are 3 voicemails from the SEC's Houston office asking for a preliminary conversation. Richard dragged a hand down his face. This is not a title issue. It's a PR hiccup. We have multiple access points. You have options, the general counsel cut in. You do not have an uncontested, clean narrative anymore. That's very different. On one of the screens, the finance channel had slapped its own headline over the footage. The shack that could sink an IPO? Richard stared at the words, at the blurry background image of his project animation, now framed as a question mark instead of a triumph. She's one woman, he said finally, in a shack. She's one woman with a deed and a camera on her, the counsel replied. Right now, she's a story. If we don't handle this carefully, she becomes a case, and cases are a lot harder to control. On screen, Madeline's voice played again. I don't think a billion-dollar company gets to build its future on pretending I don't exist. Richard's reflection wavered over hers in the glass. Somewhere under a rusted tin roof on a scrubby lot in Hunters Creek Village, the woman in the shack was probably lying awake, wondering what she'd just started. Up here, in the chill of conditioned air and LED glow, he knew exactly what it was. The moment a private problem became a public one. By the end of the week, the shack had become a line item on other people's crisis agendas. Madeline could tell because her phone wouldn't shut up. Reporters called, bloggers emailed. A podcast about everyday Davids versus corporate Goliaths left a voicemail asking if she'd come on and share your truth. Someone from a nonprofit wanted to know if she was interested in being the face of environmental justice along the bayou. She ignored most of it. The ones she didn't ignore were the lawyers. Not the ones from Collins, Marsh, and Tate. New ones. Voices that opened with, I saw you on the news, and followed with, I do land use litigation, and we should talk contingency. And in one case, I would pay money to wipe that smirk off Alaman's face in front of a judge. She had no idea how to pick a lawyer. Yelp reviews didn't seem like the right metric. In the end, she went with the woman who called and didn't sound excited at all. Name's Anna Hernandez, she said. I saw the clip. I've spent 15 years suing companies that think title risk is a suggestion, not a law. I also grew up 2 streets over from where you are. If you want someone who's not going to fangirl you or sell you out, I'm available. Pro bono, at least until we know if there's a real case. Why pro bono? Madeline asked suspiciously. You don't even know me. I know guys like Alaman, Anna said, and I like it when they have bad weeks. So, when the email came from Alaman Grid's general counsel requesting a confidential settlement discussion, Madeline didn't answer it herself. She forwarded it to Anna with one line, You free to go poke the bear? The financial press had moved fast. One day after the town hall, a blog post on a niche energy site ran with the headline, Did Alaman Grid forget to lock the door on its flagship storage asset? By the next, a bigger outlet had picked it up, adding phrases like title risk overhang and potentially undisclosed liabilities. Analysts on TV started saying things like, We love the technology, but we need clarity on West Houston before we can recommend jumping in at these valuations. Then the letter from the SEC arrived in Alaman's inbox. It used polite, careful words like inquiry and preliminary, but the subtext was clear. Explain yourself, now. Regulators at the state level followed suit. The agency handling subsurface permits sent notice that it was reviewing the status of access agreements related to Cavern H3. Investor relations at Alum and Grid drowned in emails. Everybody suddenly cares about the shack, the IR director told Richard grimly, sliding a printout of talking points across the table. They want to know if it can hold the IPO hostage. That's an actual quote from a fund manager. Richard, who'd barely slept in 3 days, rubbed his eyes. We fix it, quietly, properly, no more half measures. The general counsel nodded. We set up a meeting, neutral territory, no SUVs on her lawn, and this time we don't send associates, we go ourselves. And me, Richard said. She hesitated. Are you sure that's wise? She made it personal, he said, so I'll make it personal back, in a different way. The mediation office downtown was the kind of place designed to make conflict feel civilized. Thick carpets, soft lighting, abstract art in calming blues and greens. Conference rooms with glass walls frosted just opaque enough to suggest transparency while guaranteeing privacy. Madeline felt underdressed the second she walked in. Jeans and a clean shirt were all she owned that counted as nice. Her one pair of boots that were held together with duct tape squeaked faintly on the polished floor. Anna walked beside her, briefcase in hand, wearing a navy suit that somehow made her look both approachable and like she ate Fortune 500 companies for breakfast. "You're sure about this?" Madeline murmured. "No," Anna said, "but we're here anyway. Remember, this isn't you begging them for anything. This is them trying to rearrange their mess without stepping in it." The receptionist led them to a conference room with a long table, a carafe of coffee, and a bowl of individually wrapped mints that looked like they'd never been touched. On one side of the table sat the general counsel, a junior attorney, and a man Madeline recognized from the news segments as Alaman's CFO. On the other sat 2 empty chairs. At the head of the table, surprisingly, sat Richard. He stood when they entered. The last time she'd seen him in person, he'd been on her patch of dirt. The time after that, he'd been on her television. Here, in the neutral, climate-controlled air, he looked smaller, or maybe it was just that she wasn't meeting him with the shack at her back. "Mrs. Williams, Mrs. Hernandez, thank you for coming," he said. "Mr. Alaman," Anna said, "you asked for this meeting. Let's see if you can make it worth my client's time." He gave her a quick, appraising look, then gestured to the chairs. They sat. A mediator, a neutral party with an affable face and a tie that tried too hard, introduced himself, laid down a few ground rules about confidentiality and civility, then nodded for the companies to begin. The general counsel summarized Alum and Grid's position. They're developing critical infrastructure. They've engaged in good faith negotiations with Mrs. Williams, and they want to resolve any misunderstandings so everyone can move forward. Anna did not bother to be so gentle. "My client owns the subsurface rights under her parcel," she said. "Your own predecessor company acknowledged that when it tried to lease them from her grandfather. There is no recorded easement or lease granting you access through her parcel, yet your public filings describe
Complete, uncontested control of the cavern. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a misrepresentation. Alleged, the junior attorney put in quickly. Alleged, Anna conceded with a smile that had no warmth in it. For now. Richard cleared his throat. "Look," he said, dropping some of the boardroom polish, "I'm not going to pretend we've handled this perfectly. We moved fast, maybe too fast for the paperwork to keep up. But the reality is, this project is already partially built. We've sunk hundreds of millions into it. It's going to make the grid more stable for millions of people. One land parcel should not be able to derail that." Anna nodded. "I agree," she said. "One land parcel should not be able to derail a project like this." Richard blinked, surprised. "Which is why," she continued, "if you had been smarter, you would have treated that parcel like the keystone it is from the very beginning." The CFO shifted uncomfortably. Our client is willing to be reasonable, the general counsel said. We're prepared to revisit our prior offer. We're not here to sell, Anna said. We're here to lease. Richard frowned. A lease still leaves title risk on our books, he said. Investors will be a lot more nervous about a lawsuit or an injunction, Anna interrupted, especially now that the SEC and the state board are sniffing around. A properly structured lease, disclosed as part of your revised filings, resolves the risk and makes you look responsible. A scramble to take land from the woman you've been pressuring while pretending she doesn't exist? That looks less good. Madeline watched them play legal ping-pong, her fingers laced tightly in her lap. This was the part she'd been most afraid of. Not the cameras, not the town hall. This, sitting at a table where everyone else spoke fluent corporate and law and trying not to drown. Ms. Williams, the mediator said gently, why don't you tell us, in your own words, what you want out of this process? Anna nodded to her. Your turn. She swallowed, then reached into her tote and set her grandfather's map on the table. The red blob of the cavern sat there between water glasses and legal pads like another participant. I didn't ask for any of this, she began. I didn't even know there was a cavern until a few weeks ago. I thought I just had a shack and some bad memories and a tax bill I couldn't pay. She took a breath. But my grandfather knew what was under there, she went on. He didn't sell. He didn't sign your dad's lease, or whoever that was. He left it to me. I'm not interested in pretending that doesn't mean anything. She tapped the map lightly. You want to use this? Fine, use it. But I'm not going to hand it over to you forever for a one-time check and a gag order. Richard watched her carefully. There was no smirk now, just focus. What I want, she said, feeling steadier as she spoke, is 3 things. 1, to stay on my land, or at least not be punished for giving you access to what's under it. 2, a share in whatever you make from using my cavern, not just a pat on the head and a payout. 3, some kind of guarantee that this project actually benefits more than just your stock price. Anna slid a single-page term sheet across the table, already typed up. Specifically, she said, we're proposing a long-term subsurface access lease, 50 years, renewable, granting your client the right to use the cavern beneath Ms. Williams' parcel, in exchange for a signing bonus, substantial but not extravagant, an ongoing royalty of X% of gross revenues attributable to the cavern's storage operations with a minimum annual payment, equity participation, call it a small stake in the specific project entity, not the entire parent company, the creation of a community resilience fund funded by your project revenues to support Hunters Creek Village and adjacent less wealthy neighborhoods during outages and floods, independent environmental monitoring with data shared publicly, and a narrowly tailored confidentiality clause that protects your proprietary technical details without preventing Ms. Williams from speaking generally about her role and this agreement. The CFO's eyebrows shot up at the word gross. We can possibly. You can, Anna said. You just don't want to. Richard skimmed the page, lips thinning. This is a bit ambitious, he said. So is building a giant battery under a city, Madeline said. You seem okay with ambition when it's yours. There are limits to what we can give one landowner without setting a precedent that screws us everywhere else, the general counsel said. There's also a limit to how many headlines you can weather with the words title risk and SEC review in them before this IPO starts to smell toxic. Settlement with key stakeholder and community benefits package plays a lot better. The mediator cleared his throat. Perhaps we could break this down, he suggested. Address each point in turn. They did. The signing bonus number bounced up, then down, then up again as both sides tested each other's nerves. The royalty went from fantasy to scary to grudgingly workable. They argued about percentages until Madeline's head spun, and she started assigning personalities to the numbers. The equity stake drew groans from the CFO. If we give her equity in the project entity, we're going to have every other surface owner lining up with their hands out. You're already buying most of them outright, Anna said. Ms. Williams is different. She's been public. She's the one people see in their mind when they think shack over a cavern. Folding her into the project visibly isn't just a concession, it's marketing. They haggled over the community fund next. Richard balked at tying disbursements to revenue. Anna pushed back until they settled on a minimum annual contribution with upside if profits exceeded projections. Environmental monitoring went faster. Even Alaman's team knew that offering transparency there would look good in the next press release. The confidentiality clause took the longest. We need comfort that she's not going to go on TV and accuse us of fraud every 6 months, the general counsel said. I need comfort that you're not going to sue her for mentioning the word cavern at a family barbecue, Anna replied. In the end, they carved narrow language. No disclosure of specific technical methods, no leaking of non-public financials, but no bar on speaking about the existence of the lease, her role in negotiating it, or the fact that Alaman's project depended on her consent. And no non-disparagement, Anna added. She's allowed an opinion. Richard pinched the bridge of his nose. Do you want to just write our press release while you're at it? He muttered. Already did, Anna said, in my head. It starts with Alaman Grid and local landowner reach landmark agreement on community-centered energy project. Investors eat that up. All the while, time ticked. Every few minutes, someone's phone buzzed. A text here, an email there. Once, the general counsel excused herself to take a call. When she came back, her expression had shifted from controlled to strained. The state board is opening a formal review, she said quietly to Richard, not quite out of earshot. Madeline pretended not to hear. Anna absolutely heard, her eyes sharpened. That review could delay your operational timeline by how long? 6 months? A year? We don't know that there will be any delay, the general counsel said stiffly. But your investors will assume the worst until you show them otherwise, Anna pressed. A signed, disclosed lease with my client goes a long way towards otherwise. This was the turning point. Madeline could feel it. Something in Richard's posture shifted, less resistance, more calculation of how much blood he could afford to lose to get the tourniquet on. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling for a long second, then looked straight at Madeline. If we do this, he said, you're going to be tied to this project. When people talk about West Houston storage, your name is going to come up. When something goes wrong, because something always goes wrong eventually, they're going to call you too. You understand that, right? She thought about the shack, about the drone, the code inspector, the muttered insults on the sidewalk, about the last few weeks of her life being turned inside out. My name's already out there, she said. At least this way, I'm not just the woman they tried to steamroll. I'm the woman they had to deal with. He studied her, some strange mix of irritation and reluctant respect simmering behind his eyes. Fine, he said at last. He turned to his team. We can live with the lease. We can live with the royalty at a lower rate than what's on this paper. Equity, but a small percentage. The community, we structure it through a foundation. Monitoring, fine. Confidentiality as long as we carve out a narrow non-defamation clause. Anna nodded slowly. We can work with that, she said. They broke for an hour to let the lawyers hammer the vague points into actual language. When they reconvened, the term sheet had turned into something thicker, heavier, real. The mediator slid copies across the table. Subject to final documentation, he said, this represents a binding agreement in principle on the major terms. There, on the last page, were signature lines, one with Alaman Grid, authorized representative, one with Madeline C. Williams, lessor. Her hand heavy as she picked up the pen. She thought of her grandfather at the kitchen crate, telling her never to sign anything she didn't understand. Thought of the maps, the safe, the old lease with no scribbled under it. Then she thought of this, his no forcing a better deal decades later, his stubbornness ripening into leverage she could actually use. Ray, she murmured just under her breath. When the camera panned to the invited guests behind the barrier, she spotted the mayor of Hunters Creek, the city engineer, a couple of state reps,
And in the middle of them, Tina, grinning and waving at the lens like she'd accidentally crashed the party. Text buzzed again. They gave us tiny sandwiches. Also, you're trending again, LOL. Hard pass, she replied. Let them cut their own ribbons. A knock sounded on her door. For a second, her shoulders tightened, old reflex. She still sometimes expected bad news to arrive on her porch. She opened it to find Richard standing on her front step, tie loosened, jacket slung over one shoulder. No entourage, no lawyers. Afternoon, he said. You lose your way to your own press conference? She asked. He smiled, tired around the edges. It's over, he said. Thought I'd stop by while I was in the neighborhood. She stepped aside. He looked around, taking in the new addition, the softened lines of the shack. His gaze lingered on the exposed strip of old metal wall she'd left visible like a stripe. Looks different, he said. It doesn't leak, that's the main thing. He nodded, then glanced toward the open hatch. You still going down there a lot? Sometimes, she said. It's cooler than upstairs, and I like to annoy the ghost of my grandfather by telling him he accidentally invented my career. That pulled a real laugh out of him. He shifted his weight, suddenly awkward. I wanted to say, I know this could have gone another way, he said. I'm not used to being forced to share control or credit. Oh, I've noticed, she said dryly. But you didn't just blow it up, he continued. You could have. SEC injunction, lawsuits, scorched earth. You didn't. You pushed hard, and then you made a deal, a fair one. I respect that. She studied him for a moment. The last time they'd spoken here, he'd tried to scare her with visions of condemnation and endless legal fees. Now his project depended on her signature sitting in a safe. I didn't spare you, she said. I spared myself. I didn't want to live the next 10 years in court any more than you did. He inclined his head. Either way, we both walk away better off than if we'd stuck to our first instincts. Your first instinct was to pretend I didn't exist, she pointed out. He had the grace to wince. Point taken, he said. They stood there for a beat, the silence not exactly comfortable, but not hostile either. How's the fund? The community piece? First year we did generators and water heater lifts, she said. Next year I want to do micro grants for small businesses that get wiped out by floods, and a few more scholarships. There's a kid over on the other side of the bayou who wants to study geology. You'd like her, she hates suits. He smiled. Send her my way when she's done. We'll need people who understand the rocks better than the spreadsheets. Maybe she'll charge you more, Madeline said. A honk sounded from the street. A black car idled by the curb, driver visible through the windshield. Well, he said, I should go reassure some investors that the world isn't ending, again. It rarely is, she said. Not for you, anyway. He paused on the threshold. For what it's worth, he said, when they write the history of this thing, you're going to be a footnote they linger on, even if they don't use your name. I plan to use my own name plenty, so I'll survive. He nodded, some unreadable expression flickering across his face, then walked back to the car. As it pulled away, he glanced back once at the lot, at the hybrid of shack and house that now sat where he'd once stood with $500 in his hand and panic in his eyes. That evening, as the sun slid down behind the live oaks and the sky went soft and pink over the bayou, Madeline stood where the old front step had been. The wind rattled the leaves gently. The metal skin of the shack creaked once, a familiar, less desperate sound now that it had proper support. She closed her eyes and tried to feel the hum beneath everything, the draw and push of energy moving in and out of the cavern, the quiet flecks of pressure changes far below her bare feet. She thought of the girl she'd been, counting coins to buy coffee, listening to neighbors call her home an eyesore. The woman she'd been a few months ago, staring at a contract promising her more money than she'd ever seen in one place in exchange for her silence. She thought of the man who'd come to her door with 5 $100 bills and a lie about being a local investor. Sure, she'd thank him for the insult. He'd offered her $500 to walk away. Instead, she made him pay attention. And in the process, she'd finally understood what her grandfather had been trying to teach her all along. The most valuable things in the world aren't the shiny builds people put on top. They're the foundations nobody sees, the stubborn no, the hidden map, the quiet choice to stand your ground on a little patch of earth until the rest of the world had no choice but to meet you there.